If someone had told me that the house my father gave entirely to my brother would one day legally become mine because of a single sentence hidden inside his will, I would have laughed in disbelief. But that's exactly what happened. The strange part? My brother celebrated for nearly 3 weeks. He changed the locks. He threw away my childhood belongings. He even told everyone in town that I was finally out of the family forever. He believed he had won. What he didn't know was that my father had spent months planning one final lesson. A lesson that would expose greed, reveal loyalty, and change all of our lives forever. My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a quiet town in Vermont where everyone knew my parents. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect family. A hardworking father, a loving mother, a beautiful old family house that had belonged to my grandparents, and 2 children, my older brother Daniel and me. People always assumed Dad loved Daniel more. Honestly, so did I. Whenever Daniel made a mistake, Dad forgave him. Whenever I succeeded, Dad simply nodded and changed the subject. After years of this, I stopped trying to compete. Instead, I built my own life. I became a nurse. I rented a small apartment 40 minutes away. I visited my parents every weekend. I cooked for them. I took Dad to his medical appointments. I repaired things around the house whenever Daniel was too busy. Daniel rarely visited, but every Christmas, he arrived with expensive gifts, perfect smiles, and endless promises that he'd start helping next month. Dad never argued. He simply smiled. Looking back now, I think he noticed far more than anyone realized. Then, everything changed. One cold October morning, my phone rang at 5:47 a.m. It was the hospital. Dad had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I arrived, he was already gone. I remember standing beside his bed, holding his hand, wondering if he knew I was there during those final moments. Daniel arrived almost an hour later. His designer suit looked perfect. His eyes didn't. He hugged me for exactly 3 seconds, then quietly asked, "The house? Did Dad ever change the will?" That was the first thing he wanted to know. Not how Dad died. Not whether he suffered. Not whether Mom was okay. The house. At that moment, something inside me broke. Dad's funeral was held 3 days later. More than 200 people came. Former co-workers, neighbors, church friends, even people I had never met stood in line to tell me how kind my father had been. One sentence kept repeating itself. Your father was the kind of man who never forgot the people who stood beside him. At the time, I thought they were simply comforting me. I had no idea those words would soon become the key to everything. After the service, our family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, asked Daniel, Mom, and me to meet him at his office the following Monday. Daniel couldn't hide his excitement. During lunch after the funeral, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Dad always said the house would stay with the oldest son." I simply nodded. Arguing felt pointless. The house had never mattered to me as much as my father did. At least, that's what I believed then. Monday arrived. Mr. Harrison placed a thick brown envelope on the table. Dad's signature covered the seal. The room became completely silent. He adjusted his glasses, opened the envelope carefully, and began reading. Most of the will was exactly what everyone expected. Dad left money to several charities, a small college fund for his grandchildren, his vintage truck to his best friend. Mom received all their joint savings. Then came the sentence Daniel had been waiting for. The family residence located on Willow Creek Road shall be inherited by my son, Daniel Carter. Daniel smiled so widely that I thought his face might split. He actually laughed. I knew it. He looked directly at me. I guess that's settled. I forced a smile. Even though disappointment stung, I congratulated him, because that's what family should do. Or so I believed. Before the meeting even ended, Daniel was already talking about renovations. I'm knocking down the old garage. The kitchen needs a complete makeover. And honestly, I'll probably turn Emily's old bedroom into a gym. He said it while looking straight at me, as if erasing every trace of my childhood somehow proved he deserved the house. Mr. Harrison remained strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. He closed the file. But instead of standing up, he rested one hand on the final page. Then he looked at Daniel. There is one additional section. Daniel barely listened. I'm sure it's just legal wording. The lawyer replied calmly, No. It was personally written by your father. For the first time that morning, Daniel stopped smiling. Daniel leaned back in his chair and laughed. I've got a meeting with a contractor this afternoon. I'd like to start renovations this week. Mr. Harrison didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the folder and removed a smaller sealed envelope. The paper looked older than the will itself. Across the front, in Dad's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, Read only after Daniel celebrates receiving the house. The smile slowly faded from Daniel's face. What is that supposed to mean? Mr. Harrison calmly broke the seal. This letter was written nearly 4 years ago. Your father never changed a single word. The room became silent. Even Mom looked confused. The lawyer began reading. To my children, if Daniel is smiling right now, then he has already forgotten the first lesson I ever tried to teach him. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Harrison continued, A house is made of wood, stone, and glass. A home is built by the people willing to protect it. I felt a lump form in my throat. Those sounded exactly like Dad. Simple, quiet, but impossible to forget. The lawyer turned the page. Then he stopped. He looked directly at Daniel. Your father attached one legally binding condition. Daniel folded his arms. Fine. What condition? Mr. Harrison read slowly. Daniel shall become the legal owner immediately. Daniel smiled again. Provided that he personally lives in the family home for 1 full year. His smile remained. That seemed easy enough. The lawyer continued, while allowing his sister, Emily, unrestricted access to every room in the house. Daniel frowned. What? Because this house has always belonged to both of my children emotionally, even if only one inherits it legally. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Mr. Harrison ignored him. He kept reading. During that year, Daniel may not sell the property, mortgage it, transfer ownership, or force Emily to leave. The room grew quiet. Then came the sentence that changed everything. If Daniel violates any of these conditions, ownership of the entire property shall immediately transfer to Emily. Daniel shot to his feet. No, you can't be serious. Mr. Harrison calmly slid another document across the table. It was signed. It was witnessed. It was approved. It is completely enforceable. Daniel looked at Mom. Say something. She looked down at the table. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I wasn't celebrating. I was still trying to understand why Dad would do something like this. Then Mr. Harrison quietly added, Emily, your father also left you something else. He reached into his briefcase and placed a small brass key on the table. There is a locked wooden chest in your father's workshop. He instructed me to give you this key, only after Daniel heard the hidden clause. My heart started racing. What is inside the chest? Mr. Harrison gave a faint smile. I honestly don't know. But your father wrote one final instruction. Emily must open it in front of the entire family. Daniel stared at the key. His face had turned completely white. Because for the first time, he realized the will wasn't over. Dad still had one final surprise waiting. Nobody moved. The small brass key lay in the middle of the table. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off it. He finally broke the silence. Whatever is in that chest belongs to the house. Mr. Harrison calmly shook his head. No. Your father was very clear. The chest belongs to Emily, and it may only be opened in front of the entire family. 30 minutes later, we stood inside Dad's old workshop. The smell of sawdust still filled the air. His tools hung neatly on the wall exactly as he'd left them. In the corner, Under his old workbench sat a small wooden chest. I recognized it immediately. When I was a little girl, I'd asked Dad what was inside. He smiled and said, "The right answer, at the right time." I never asked again. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. The lock clicked. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside were only 3 things: an old leather journal, a sealed envelope, and a flash drive. Mr. Harrison smiled softly. "I believe your father wanted us to watch the video first." He plugged the flash drive into Dad's old television. The screen flickered. Then Dad appeared. He was sitting in the workshop, healthy, smiling, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," then my plan worked. A tear rolled down Mom's cheek. Dad continued, "Daniel, I know you're probably angry, but this was never about choosing one child over another. It was about discovering who understood what this house truly meant." Daniel lowered his head. Dad looked straight into the camera. "For 25 years, Emily quietly cared for this home. She repaired things, visited every weekend, helped your mother, and asked for nothing in return." Then his voice became firmer. "Daniel, you only visited when you needed something." The room fell silent. Dad reached for another sheet of paper. "There is something none of you know." He smiled gently. 5 years ago, I transferred the ownership of the house into a family trust." Daniel's eyes widened. "What?" Dad continued. "The will never directly owned the house. The trust did. The will only determined who would control that trust." Mr. Harrison nodded. "That's correct." Dad smiled again. "And the hidden clause was designed to reveal whether Daniel deserved that responsibility." He paused. "If he failed, the trust automatically names Emily as the permanent owner." Daniel's face lost all color. Everything he'd celebrated, everything he'd bragged about, had disappeared with one sentence Dad had written years earlier. He looked at me. For the first time in his life, there was no arrogance, only regret. "I spent years trying to own Dad's house," he whispered. "I never realized you were the one who had always protected his home." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around the workshop. Every shelf, every tool, every memory. Then I smiled through tears. Dad never wanted one of us to win. He wanted both of us to become better. Daniel quietly nodded. And in that moment, he finally understood what our father had been trying to teach him all along.